Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday webinar in the beautiful month of July. So I hope everyone is staying safe and well and not too bored, but looking forward to maybe a summer break. So
well, I know I am, Rachel, so yes.
I'm joined today by Alastair yet again, who's been hard at work writing articles for us. And his latest article is on memorabilia and what makes memorabilia collectible.
This question that we probably want to look into is what actually is a piece of memorabilia. Now, a memorabilia can hold so many different kind of types of items. So generally speaking, it's an item that holds a link with someone or something. So for example, you can collect maybe music memorabilia and have, I don't know, specific bands or events or even individuals within those bands' items. I'm obviously referring to the musical side of things. There's something to be said, I suppose, that with some memorabilia, it can almost be completely worthless without a connection to that person. So, for example, we'll come on to it later, maybe an item of clothing that was worn by somebody or maybe a piece of paper. And I suppose one could argue that a signature is a piece of memorabilia, and that signature, were it not by somebody very famous, would be almost, valueless.
Well, I suppose memorabilia fits into different pockets, doesn't it? So whether it is music or whether it is sporting, I spent a lot of my early days involved in golfing memorabilia when there was still a collector's sort of market. It sort of declined these days. But and again, you could say even classic cars is memorabilia.
Yeah, I think classic cars is a good example, because obviously there is the classic car side of things. But a few years ago, I remember I sold an old SS Jaguar, which is obviously the name of Jaguar cars before Jaguar, and just the manual from it made a few £1,000s. And you can actually look at these things as being the ephemera and the memorabilia that goes with them. And so even with classic cars, the original luggage that went with them or something along those lines. And again, we get into, when it's classic cars, then you look at maybe motorsport and you look at kind of the connections that people have with that. I mean, I think the most notable one recently, I suppose, was probably the Paul Newman Rolex Daytona, which it's a really interesting one, the Daytona, actually, because you're almost looking at a piece of incredibly rare horological interest. But then on top of that, you've got the fact that it was a film star and also a racing driver in Paul Newman. So you've got kind of completely different facets. Now, it's one of the few items, I think, that possibly had more value as a watch than it did as a piece of memorabilia. But you put them both together, and you've got a significant amount of value in there. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
I mean, we've certainly seen the rock and pop side increase in value. And again, I always wonder whether rock and pop has a certain lifetime sort of value to it. But if we look at recent sort of newspaper articles and headliners, I mean, it's Kurt Cobain's guitar.
Yeah, I mean, let's just see if we've got an image of that a second. I'll just see if we've got something there. Bear with me 2 moments just for our watchers.
Now, while you do that, Alastair, now this would obviously appear in a rock and pop. It wouldn't appear under musical instruments.
Now, here's the thing. No, it wouldn't do. Now, what you've got is a Martin D18E, which was actually a relatively rare guitar as it was. I think there's only about 300 of them made. So if you look at that kind of value, if it went into a guitar auction, let's say, it would be in the tens of thousands of pounds, because it was, rare as you like. However, it just completely steps up another register, obviously, when we're talking about Kurt Cobain's guitar. Now, here's a photo, obviously, from its most famous outing, which this was unplugged for MTV, and this was recorded on December the 16th, 1993. And then it was released posthumously in December of 1994. But the really fascinating part of this, for me at least, is the fact that this is completely what Nirvana didn't do. Do you know what I mean? They sat down playing acoustic guitars and being all nice. And you know, the vast majority of shows that, you know, I saw of Nirvana were, you know, Kurt Cobain with a Fender Jaguar, and, you know, was basing it, you know, putting it through Marshall cabinets and, you know, trashing the stage at the end of every show. So this was
Yes,
completely
he looks totally gorgeous and very angelic. Which
I think a lot of people said that about him, and I've actually met a few people that did know him. Somebody in a band called Teenage Fan Club called Norman Blake, who I've had the pleasure of meeting a few times, just said he was just an incredibly nice guy, because they toured with him, and you know, he was just a really nice, placid guy. But unfortunately,
you have your own music story, Alastair, don't you?
Yeah,
in a boy band.
we won't go into too much detail on that, but
that's what you find out, you see, of your members of staff when you've got time in lockdown.
Unfortunately, so I'm sure there are videos going around YouTube as we speak. But no, I mean, going back to Kurt again. Again, the really weird part of it is that the album that they released actually from this, it really wasn't anything like Nirvana would normally do. So lots of cover versions that, you know, were suited to acoustic guitars that, you know, primarily wasn't what they did. But again, it falls into this kind of timeline. You know, this was recorded in you know, late 1993, and, you know, of April of the following year, unfortunately, he took his own life, very sadly. But it's a very sad story with the guitar, really, to be honest, which I'm not sure many people know of. We've obviously seen all the headlines with the fact that it's made £6 million. But Kurt Cobain's daughter, Frances, she actually inherited the guitar when Kurt Cobain died. And she married quite young, and not for a very long period of time. And she had gifted this guitar to her husband, and unfortunately they got divorced. And it all went through a huge legal wrangling, and at the time I think they said it was worth about $1 million or something like that, or they projected that it would be worth about $1 million, and the judge unfortunately awarded it to her husband. So as soon as that was done, I think within a matter of months it was sent to Julian's to be sold. So
that's so sad.
It is quite sad, and, you know.
Did the daughter have any money? Would she have been bidding on it, or?
I don't know that, but one would have thought that the royalty stream from Nirvana probably isn't that small. So I doubt she, to be honest, I wonder whether she'd want to own it again, in all honesty, after all the wranglings that have gone with it. So it's a bit of a sad story.
It is a sad story.
But the funny thing is, though, we're looking at the guitar there, and obviously that's it's now the most valuable guitar ever sold, the most valuable piece of memorabilia, and it's incredible. But again, what a lot of people don't realize is last year that cardigan that he's wearing actually sold at auction as well, by the same auction house, and that made $334,000 for his cardigan.
No.
So yeah, so you can see how, obviously, but you see that the cardigan, to my mind, is more definitive of that period of music, and more definitive of this grunge period that everyone was going through at that time than the guitar is even. So it's an interesting kind of flip, really, that, you know, the guitar that completely really hasn't got that much to do with it. I mean, the album that it played on, you could, you know, play it to your grandparents and they'd probably enjoy it, whereas you play kind of Bleach or Nevermind, and I don't think anyone over 40 would probably like it back in the 90s anyway. But it was it was a strange
but
time.
Obviously, with this piece, with the guitar, it's the fact that it's his that creates the value. So
exactly.
What would a guitar coming up for sale achieve? Hundreds rather than millions?
Well, I think the thing is, that guitar specifically, what would that be worth without his connection 10, 15 grand, something like that, which for an acoustic guitar is actually a reasonable amount of money. But it was a scarce guitar before he even kind of put his name on it, if you see what I mean. But again, I think the funny thing that I mentioned in my article is the fact that it was, if you know, I don't know this for certain, but if you could think about how anti-establishment and how anti-media I think Nirvana were, for that guitar to go on and sell for £6 million is the complete antithesis of what they kind of stood for. I think that on one of their records they had a track called Radio Friendly Unit Shifter, which I think kind of sums up kind of their feeling towards kind of the media and the way it works.
Catchy tune, Alastair.
Yeah, it was a classic. Yeah, but it's it's a complicated one. But he was a complicated chap, so I think quite clearly that kind of puts it in context. But
so
yeah,
as we move from obviously rock and pop, we can move then into things like film. Which again crosses different sort of areas, because I always think of things like Marilyn Monroe's jewellery or Elizabeth Taylor's jewellery. Now obviously they were film stars, but again it was their, like with Cobain, it was his cardigan. So it's the fact that they were owned by these individuals. But obviously film brings stars into our homes, and we have an affection with stars. And then you also look at what the film companies are doing by constantly putting out memorabilia. Posters. I mean, posters make huge amounts of money now. Oh,
it's ridiculous. I mean, the market, I think it's a really good question when we look at the difference between, you know, film stars from the golden age. And, you know, it's strange that it was only a few years ago, really, in the whole grand scheme of things, when Liz Taylor's jewellery actually came up for auction. And how much of that was because she was a phenomenal film star? Quite a lot of them out. But let's be perfectly honest here, the jewellery was absolutely exquisite. And when you're looking at it from that point of view, it could have belonged to anyone and made millions and millions and millions of pounds. So if we are trying to put the celebrity kind of side on it, then perhaps it's more akin to something like, I don't know, we had a client recently with a very famous film poster that was worth, you know, in the region of £500,000, because that's, you know, the market for these things is so huge. People want them. And again, I think one of the, I'm going to choose my words carefully here and be careful about what I say, is one of the most enthusiastic fan kind of group, the Star Wars groups. And if you look at the kind of things they buy and the kind of things they get into, it's fascinating. And I've got a little example here of, let's have a little look, of something that's sold for an astonishing amount of money. Let's see if we can just find it. So this isn't actually me when I go on a house call. It's this is actually a stormtrooper's helmet, shall we say, and this is from 1977, the New Hope film that Star Wars came out. And again, I think one of the most definitive pieces. I think I'm not a big Star Wars fan. I'm not sure whether you are, Rachel. But you look potentially more like a Star Trek kind of person. But as I say, with this, I don't know the films that well, but you can instantly associate it with that film, and you can instantly look at it and know exactly where it's from and know exactly what it is. And that's one of the reasons. And this is one of the items that was actually used in the film, and this made £130,000, which for a bit of plastic, let's be perfectly honest, or fiberglass rather, isn't that bad. So no. It's a really kind of, you know, interesting piece.
It is amazing what these pieces can go for, and obviously if you're insuring them, you need to ensure that you're following that market, because again, certainly looking at, say, Star Wars, their new film must have again boosted values.
Oh, it always does. It always does. And if you've read my article on comics, for example, one could almost call a comic to a certain degree, and if, you know, although the films came after the comics in a lot of ways, but you could almost look at a comic as a piece of ephemera. So with the Captain America comics, for example, when the Captain America film came out, the comics soared in value. And it's exactly the same with when Star Wars released a new film back in late 90s, when the whole kind of new generation of Star Wars films started coming out. It was incredible. All the original stuff started absolutely soaring in price. And the original plastic models that were still in the blister packs were making tons and tons of money. And they've gone up and down, and they've kind of, you know, ridden waves, and they've actually managed to do incredibly well and actually been a fairly good investment. But I think a lot of people, what they won't realize is you start looking at these things and you think, well, there's some old toys, but they're not. And there's, you know, there's a significant collection within it.
But again, this area does cross different areas of the market. So whether you'd call it a collectible, or whether you'd see it in a poster auction sale, or, you know, there are different areas that you can look at. Again, you know, suppose looking at sporting memorabilia, whether you're looking at those pieces in individual sales for sporting memorabilia, or whether it's coming up, you know, in, let's say, for instance, Mr. Jordan's shoes, you know, they weren't in a sporting sale. They were actually in a memorabilia sale.
Yeah. I think the critical thing with Michael Jordan is that was he a sports star? Yes. But was he an icon? I think even more so than being a basketball player. I think during the 90s, I mean, during the 90s, I was at school in Cheltenham. I'd never seen a basketball game in my entire life, but I knew who Michael Jordan was. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's a really, really good example of somebody who's completely iconic. I think the same, maybe late 80s, certainly before about 1994. I think O.J. Simpson was probably the same, and they were deemed to be just these iconic sports people rather, but not necessarily completely defined by their sport. And with the advent of his trainer deal, which is one of the biggest ever, you know, trainer deals, I think it's rumored that he's made over £1 billion from his trainer endorsement with Nike, which was more than he ever earned in his entire career playing basketball. So if you look at it from that point of view, he's almost a fashion icon as much as he is a basketball icon.
But I suppose this is when product placement started. So, you know, which we're used to these days. But when you first started seeing advertisements, I mean, gosh, they were a totally new thing.
Well, actually, I think a really good example, we have to kind of flip back to music slightly here. Brian Epstein, actually, when he signed the Beatles, he signed them up for so many endorsements with the world's most ridiculous amount of naff products that you could possibly imagine in the early 60s, and made an absolute killing off it, because the way in which, it's a similar thing, the way in which music works nowadays is you get publishing royalties and you get record sales royalties, but all of the naff things that you put your face on, so for example, the Beatles were, you know, producing pens with mop tops on them and things like this, they got all the royalties from them. The record company didn't see anything of it because they weren't on the record. So all of these oddities came out, and these things nowadays, you know, if you find yourself with a Beatles pencil tin or something like that, it's worth money because everyone used them, threw them away, and these things now are what people consider to be memorabilia. But going back to Michael Jordan again, with the trainers, I think, let's just see, I think we might even have a photograph of them. Hang on 2 seconds. So these were effectively the first kind of defining pair of trainers or sneakers, should I say, if we're being American, that he wore for his basketball career, slightly offset, I think 13 on one foot and 13 and a half on the other. And it almost defines his career. It defines his endorsement with Nike. And again, I don't know about you, but during lockdown, I certainly became a little bit more familiar with Netflix. And there was a fantastic documentary called The Last Dance, which was just enthralling. Again, I have no interest in basketball whatsoever, but the way in which Netflix kind of put this documentary together, it was almost like a, you know, this fantastic story. And again, as I say, it just really reinforced the importance of these shoes. And I think that's why they became so popular and why they sold for what they sold for.
So what date was this, Alastair? When are they dated?
These ones, I think it's the first pair of shoes that he had from the Nike endorsement, and I think that was 1984.
Right, okay, because they're very much Marty. They're very much Marty McFly, aren't they?
Well, actually, strangely, if you've watched our quiz, you saw me talking about Marty McFly's trainers, which sold, I think, off the top of my head for about 70 grand. I haven't got a photo of them, but yeah, I think I did that as one of our lockdown quiz questions, and I think they are very similar in style, ironically, especially considering that it's meant to be, 2020 or something like that when Marty McFly's trainers were. But they sold for about £70,000, and I think everyone knows what those trainers look like. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago, I think. So if we look at now and these selling for over $500,000, you can see that the market is clearly on the up.
Yes, I was going to say we have a client that collects trainers, and again, some of the values that they
it's insane.
I
mean, but again, you can put this down to, again, if you've read my "What's in Your Wardrobe" article or anything to do with those ones, you'll see that I talk about trainers quite a lot, because people, Kanye West, a lot of rap artists, put their names on these trainers, and again, it becomes like a piece of memorabilia. And these endorsement deals that they have mean that they're producing these, eccentric, kind of quite esoteric shoes, and people are loving them. People, grab them at the earliest opportunity.
So tell me, I always think that with pieces like this, do they have a longevity on them? In other words, while people know Michael Jordan's name, I'm sure if I said to my son, he would know who he was. But if you sort of mention stars from day gone by, I mean, I remember doing a presentation to a brokers where I asked the young chap, who was obviously a new broker, if he knew who Elvis was. And he did. I could see sort of a flicker of, I've heard of him. And I laughed and I said, well, do you know who Elizabeth Taylor is? And you could just see, haven't got a clue. So while these names are known to us and while we are collecting, will there come a day where actually the value will drop because there's no market?
It's a really good question, and I think the only way to try and answer that is to look at results from the past and to say, okay, something, let's say somebody from the golden age of cinema in the 30s or something like that, one of their items came up in the 1960s, it would be worth, a substantial amount of money. However, would that item be worth so much money nowadays? And it's almost debatable whether it would or not. Now, there are lots of classic artists from the 50s and the 60s. So we've mentioned Elvis there. We could talk about the Beatles, and we could, I suppose, Liz Taylor in the 1950s and the 1960s, possibly a little bit earlier. Actually, my knowledge, I know, is a little bit sketchy, but I think there is still interest surrounding that, and I think the greats will always be the greats. But we're looking at two items specifically on this webinar that I've spoken about at length, and I don't think it's a coincidence that both of these items come from the 1990s, which is when I was a bit younger and we were talking about these items, and we knew the artist, and we knew the basketball player. And I personally think there is a lot to be said for that being the reason. Whether or not that'll change, and whether or not, I don't know, Harry Styles' underpants will make hundreds of thousands of pounds in a few years' time, who knows?
Do you think
So
do you think that it's, let's say for instance, our age group, and I know I'm older than you, Alastair, but is it our age group that now has disposable income?
I think it's a really, I think it's a really good point. Yeah, and I think it's people of our age bracket, I think that's probably a better way of putting it, that would actually be wanting to spend things on items from their youth. and things that, again, it's dominating the classic car market as well. When people of my age start looking at kind of cars from the 1990s that they lusted after then and start thinking, I could buy one of those now, I've got the money to do it. And you start thinking, okay, that's interesting. And then you think, you know, I'm not quite at the point of being able to afford Michael Jordan's shoes, but it's I think that's the way it is. And I think it's an interesting point in terms of watches, and I know we've spoken about watches in the past, but when you look at military watches, for example, it's a really, really good way of looking at this. In the past few years, people whose parents fought in, let's say, Vietnam or Korea, the value of those watches has started to go up massively because they're buying the watches that their parents wore. Now, watches from the Second World War, for example, I think probably peaked a few years ago when people of that generation were buying their parents' watches. So I think it all moves. And, you know, whereas 20 years ago, you could probably buy a Vietnam issue service watch for next to nothing. So it's, yeah, I think generations will have their own heroes and their own icons and their own idols, and they will want to buy things that are, you know, often related to them. And I hate to say it, but often related to, you know, to when you were younger or maybe a child.
Now I'm going to move into the delicate area of sporting memorabilia. Because obviously we see lots of clients that, whether they're Muhammad Ali's gloves or they've bought a shirt at a charity auction, and again, we'll talk about charity auctions later on because they're a totally different animal. But obviously sporting memorabilia is huge, and whether it's programs, shirts, balls, you name it, whatever, they again have a huge following.
It's I think football shirts are a really, really good example, because if you are a football supporter, I'm not a big fan of football personally, but I know a lot of people that are like to have a match worn shirt, maybe by one of their favorite players, and have it signed by that player, or have it signed by a team, and those things that will always be worth money. You know, if you've got a team that's won a championship, or, you know, which is Liverpool this week actually, and I think there are lots of different angles to this as to why certain players are worth more if they were at a club for a short period of time, then it would be more valuable. Let's have a quick look, and I think I've got a photograph of something that's quite interesting here. Just bring this up. Okay, so this is one of Jackie Stewart's helmets. Now, Jackie Stewart, phenomenal driver, one of the most successful drivers of all time, and also drove for BRM, which is one of my local teams that used to exist out of Barn in Lincolnshire, believe it or not. And he, again, absolutely iconic, and his tartan on that helmet, you know, is fantastically well known. Now, this back in 2010, believe it or not, it made 10 grand, which in 2020 doesn't seem a lot of money when you're talking about everything else. Now, if I was looking at that from you know, an auction perspective, it would be at least a significant amount. And if I was looking at it from an insurance perspective, you'd be looking, I think, in this day and age, probably about £100,000, because where on earth would you get another one? And an iconic driver, an iconic helmet design, and something that has been worn during a Grand Prix. I mean, it's all the things that people who, if you're into motorsport, you know, I mean, if you're offered that at 10 grand today, you'd snap it up like you wouldn't believe, wouldn't you? So it's
again,
a really interesting piece.
We've not even mentioned, you know, that area of the market as a collectible. I mean, because again, you know, whether it's a front piece of a bumper or a steering wheel or wherever, there is so much of memorabilia from that sort of area.
It's all sports, though. You know, you obviously spent time dealing with golf things, and you know, you look at, you know, even, I mean, you must know the Featherfield leather golf balls, for example, that they made millions of. But if you get an original 19th century one of those now, it's worth about 200 quid, which seems ridiculous for something that was, you know, people made, you know, en masse.
Oh, so well, I think I sold one for about 15,000 years ago.
Oh, you've obviously had better balls than me. But it's,
well, the market, you know, the market was a very different animal back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, we had a lot of, you know, the Chinese and Japanese even buying, and a huge element of American collectors, which, you know, that whole area seems to have disappeared.
I think it was a big thing with sporting memorabilia in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, I think it died a little bit. And I remember Americans buying cricket balls for ridiculous amounts of money. But if you could have provenance that they were used at Lord's or something like that in a test match, they all wanted one. But I mean, the benefits, I suppose, you know, well, the modern sports, let's put it that way, the way in which modern sports are now, I think they create a lot more ephemera and memorabilia than they used to. You know, for example, you know, in the 1960s, a shirt that somebody wore during the World Cup final will probably have been worn by the same person throughout the tournament and washed after every game, and then they wore it again. Nowadays, footballers have, you know, a clean shirt every 45 minutes, don't they? And I think that seems to be the case, and they get a new pair of boots, and then everything goes off to a charity auction. So obviously we need to touch on a charity auction as well.
Well, I was going to say, before we do, we were obviously very lucky last year to do a valuation for the MCC, which I found fascinating, especially when it came to putting the value on the ashes. You know, there isn't a comparable. You know, also cricket is not what I suddenly realised, being, you know, when we were debating and everything else, cricket is not worldwide.
Oh, you want to go to Mumbai? If you go to Mumbai or anywhere in India, I think they would massively disagree with you. But.
No, but it you know, Americans just aren't interested in cricket. So, you know, it's part of the world that is. But obviously, putting a value on that was great fun, actually.
It's a really interesting thing. It's a fascinating subject, and what you've got more than obviously the little item is the story and everything that goes with it. And I think that again is what the value is in. The value is in the story. It's not in the item.
No, but again, it crosses different areas, because you've got cricketing pictures, you know, you've got trophies, you've got bats, you've got balls, you've got caps, you know, you've got paintings of the captains and all sorts of things. So again, there's so many different areas that people can collect if they're keen on cricket, which again, you know, it shows all different areas of sport. But yes, charity auctions, Alastair.
Yeah, it's not my favourite thing in the world, unfortunately. But having said that, they make a lot of money for charity, and I think that's the first thing to say about them, and obviously do a lot of good from that perspective. But I think the problem with the charity auction is, effectively, you've got a collection of items that obviously some superstars have put up for sale, and nobody goes to a sports memorabilia charity auction with the intention of actually going, I really, really want that item. It's often a case of where you're sat on a table and maybe on the fourth or fifth bottle of wine that you've been issued with your £300 a plate ticket. And then it's often a case of, you know, people see something that they quite like and it'll come up. And the auctioneer's job is every auctioneer's job is to get as much money as possible, but obviously they're doing it for charity. So a lot of it is about philanthropy more than it is the actual value of an item. So I have seen items in the past that people have paid a lot over the odds for. However, there have been some instances where these things have just been donated and perhaps the audience wasn't there, perhaps the auctioneer wasn't brilliant, and they've made beneath what they were actually worth. So when you look at an open market value of something or an insurance value of something, it's actually far higher than what they actually paid for it.
I know that with certainly one client that we had that was a regular charity buyer at, you know, sporting memorabilia, and having discussions with him about obviously where he would replace and how he would replace and what is the value of the item. We had a very interesting conversation, and it sort of boiled down to, what was the name on the check when you wrote it? And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, was it, you know, the Red Cross? Was it, you know, a cancer charity? I said, because that was a donation.
Yeah.
I said, you're giving to a charity. You're not, in theory, buying a piece of, you know, art or whatever. you're doing a donation. And I said, you probably wrote it through the company and it was tax deductible, so I said, you've got to be very
couldn't possibly
careful.
advocate that, but yes,
No, but you have to be very careful, and it's again going back to understanding your client and knowing where they would choose to replace should they suffer a loss. Where it's finding out where they bought it from and what the provenance of that piece is. I mean, that's really is, and certainly with all memorabilia, provenance is key. If you buy Kurt Cobain's guitar, it's how do you retain that provenance, and I'm sure the catalogue and everything else will go with it, but it's part of the story that you very much need to keep hold of.
Oh, definitely, and I think the being able to prove where things were. I mean, strangely, I know one of the world's biggest Laurel and Hardy collectors, and they focus on specific tours that they did, whereby they would sign postcards. And very helpfully, Laurel and Hardy decided to put a postmark on the back of each one of their cards where they actually did the show. And he actually managed. He's basically trying to track down all of the East Coast gigs that they did and buy everything that they signed during these tours. And the knowledge in which these people have when they're collecting these items is absolutely phenomenal. But also the information that I can glean from them is the fact that the provenance is so foolproof, because they almost made it foolproof by design. When they were actually producing these postcodes with a postmark on them, and you could tell exactly where it was, when it was, and who signed it. So it's signatures like that are phenomenal. To just touch on the Beatles once more, because there was when the Beatles were kind of at their height, kind of maybe 62 to 65, that kind of period, and they were still touring extensively. They actually used to have little autograph books passed back to get them to sign things. But John Lennon notoriously didn't like signing autographs. So Mal Evans, who was the Beatles roadie, or Neil Aspinall, who was the Beatles, was signing them for him. So there are so many collections out there of Beatles autographs that have got John, Paul, George and Ringo, but John isn't by John. And I've seen a couple of them, and you'd be surprised how many people came, but I was there, I gave it to the guy, and he came back and I said, yeah, but it's not John Lennon's signature. So that's something to consider as well.
Well, as we come to a close, I'll do my usual. All the money in the world, what would you buy?
I'm a big Formula One fan,
You are.
and I think in terms of racing, what you can buy and what comes up on the market, I think something from one of my favourite drivers. I think Graham Hill was my favourite ever driver. Won the World Championship with BRM in 1962, which is the only time the actual kind of team won that. I've had in my possession Graham Hill's diary from 1962 when he won the Monaco Grand Prix, and it's a nice thing. It's not with me at the moment. It still belongs to me, but it's at the BRM Museum in Bourne, and it details kind of all how he did, and kind of little notes about the car and how it was handling. And so I think in terms of what I want, I've got it. But there are obviously plenty of other things that come up every year, and you think, oh gosh, you wouldn't mind that.
Well, as we come to a close, I'd like to say thank you yet again for a fun and engaging webinar.
Always a pleasure.
We're going to continue for the next couple of weeks, and then probably at the end of July, we're going to take a holiday from the webinars as everybody starts to come back to their offices. I'm in my office today, which is great. And we're out and about doing, as are you, and we're out and about doing valuations with our team. We've got some nice ones coming up in the diary. And if you need to get a proposal or a quotation, give us a call. We're also offering to do training sessions with brokers. So if you'd like to do a training session with Alastair and I, we'd love to do it with your teams. We're happy to put something in the diary over the summer for us to do together. So anything that we can do to help, give us a shout. So, and Alastair, thank you.
Always a pleasure, Rachel. Lovely to see you.
And you too. Take care.
Cheerio. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.